One great wave of joy swept round the world and found its way to every nook and cranny. No one was more delighted than our African soldiers, who cheered themselves hoarse.
Everybody came out. Disabled old men, old women in slippers, and housewives leaving lunch on the stove.
I wept with joy. 5,000 Indian soldiers lit their torches. The hilltops burst into fire with scores of bonfires.
I found myself arm in arm with soldiers I had never seen before. I forgot where we went, toured the streets, and sang and sang. The significance of what it means was overwhelming. Peace.
People whose lives were shaped by the war went home. People the world did not yet know. Ernest Hemingway, Bertolt Brecht, Harold Macmillan, Vera Brittain, Charles de Gaulle, Joseph Tito, Benito Mussolini, David Ben-Gurion, Mustafa Kemal. And one of the most insignificant of them all, for now, Adolf Hitler. The German armies in France and Belgium headed home.
How we had looked forward to this moment. We used to picture it as the most splendid event of our lives. And here we are now, humbled, our souls torn and bleeding. But we can be proud of our performance. Never before has a nation, a single army, had the whole world against it and stood its ground. We protected our homeland. They never got into Germany.
In mid-December 1918, the first German troops arrived in Berlin. The people welcomed them as an army with no cause to feel ashamed.
The men wore green laurel wreaths over their steel helmets. The machine guns were garlanded with green branches. Many a soldier had a child or sweetheart on his flower-wreathed horse. A feeling of confidence, of fresh hope in the future, seems to have returned with the troops.
Germany's new Republican Chancellor, Friedrich Ebert, reinforced the dangerous illusion that they had not been beaten in this war.
I salute you, who return unvanquished from the field of battle.
The Allies were in no doubt who had beaten whom. Allied troops moved into Germany and began their watch on the Rhine. The German fleet was surrendered to Britain, and the Allies assembled in Paris to dictate the terms of the peace. US President Woodrow Wilson crossed the Atlantic to put his idealism to the test.
We have used the great words right and justice, and now we are to prove whether or not we understand those words and how they are to be applied.
But the world had not stood still between the end of the war and the start of the peace talks. On the 22nd of November 1918, the Belgian King Albert came home in triumph to Brussels. Occupied lands had been won back. The French repossessed Alsace-Lorraine.
What a moving welcome. The people were so happy and smiling, Some were pale and cried while they greeted us. They all speak absolutely pure French. They really are French, all those locals. We were treated like victors, like saviors.
These scenes confirmed that France and Belgium had been liberated from an evil grip, that this was a victory for the Allies. And in Eastern Europe, new nations arose out of shattered empires. They didn't wait for the peace conference to bring them self-determination. They tore down all signs of foreign rule and put up new frontiers. Poland carved a vast territory out of Germany and Russia. Czechoslovakia took land from Austria and Hungary. And Serbia realized the aim she'd started the war over by founding her own Slav superstate. The peace talks would recognize these new nations. They did not create them. "27 countries met in Paris to divide the spoils and define the peace. The losers were not invited.
We are going into these negotiations with our mouths full of fine phrases and our brains seething with dark thoughts.
The big decisions were made by the Council of Four. Prime Ministers Orlando of Italy, Lloyd George of Britain, Clemenceau of France, and US President Wilson. All liberals, but with very different agendas and forceful personalities.
Arguments between Lloyd George and myself were so violent, Wilson had to interpose between us with outstretched arms, saying pleasantly, "I have never come across two such unreasonable men."
Clemenceau wanted Germany restrained for the sake of French security. Orlando wanted more territory for Italy. Lloyd George looked beyond Europe to safeguard the British Empire. Wilson wanted his new world order with justice and democracy for all. But first, there was the little matter of settling the war, and that would force Wilson to compromise his ideals. The Big Four did not go into the talks planning to pin guilt for the war on Germany. But when they realized how much the war had cost, they looked for someone to foot the bill. France owed billions to Britain and America for financing her war. Britain couldn't afford to waive the debt, and America wouldn't. So the Allies turned to Germany. But she could only be made to pay up if she accepted blame for the war. So the Allies included a clause pinning the guilt on Germany.
Germany accepts the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage to which the Allied and associated governments and their nationals have been subjected as a consequence of the war imposed upon them by the aggression of Germany and her allies.
On the 7th of May 1919, the German delegation came to collect the treaty, expecting to find an even-handed settlement infused with Wilson's sense of fair play. They were horrified by what they read. 440 articles beating Germany into submission. The Germans protested so vehemently, particularly against the requirement to admit war guilt, that Lloyd George worried that the Allies had gone too far. A member of his own delegation, the renowned economist John Maynard Keynes, was openly critical. He felt that forcing Germany to pay reparations could ruin Europe, politically and economically.
The policy of reducing Germany to servitude for a generation, of degrading the lives of millions of human beings, should be abhorrent and detestable.
But Clemenceau believed the terms were fully justified, and Wilson's line had toughened. He had wanted to treat Germany fairly, but as a liberal he was appalled by the way she'd waged war, and as President of the United States, he wanted America's loans repaid.
It is a good thing that the terms should be so hard, so that Germany may know what an unjust war means. If the Germans won't sign, then we must renew the war.
Germany did sign on the 28th of June 1919 in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, 5 years to the day after the Sarajevo assassination that had triggered the war. The settlement was far from perfect. The much-touted principle that people should govern themselves was not applied outside Europe, and imperialism was condoned. But Wilson achieved his great goal, the creation of the first global forum, the League of Nations. In the event, the Allies wound up with the worst of both worlds. The Germans paid little in reparations, and the League of Nations proved powerless to force them. And the Versailles terms left some Germans, like future Nazi Rudolf Hess, smouldering with resentment, with disastrous consequences.
The only thing that keeps me going is the hope for the day of revenge, however far off it may be. I wonder whether it'll happen in my lifetime.
Marshal Ferdinand Foch felt the Allies hadn't been tough enough and realized the world would have to go to war again.
This is not peace. It is an armistice for 20 years.
He got it wrong by just 65 days.